name is Vesper Talley, 29 years old. The smell of pine and roasted ham drifted through my parents' house, so thick it clung to my sweater. The Christmas gathering had grown larger every year, as if my parents treated it like a test of their social standing. Cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends, they all arrived polished and ready to measure each other's worth by careers, houses, or vacations. I helped Mom in the kitchen, arranging appetizers on trays while Dad's voice carried from the living room. Marcus just closed a $200 million acquisition deal, Dad boasted to Uncle Robert, the construction magnate of the family. The client specifically requested him because of his reputation for handling complex international transactions. Through the doorway, I could see Marcus holding court, nodding humbly as if modesty were his crown. The relatives leaned forward, hungry for every detail. He had always known how to feed them. I stacked crackers and cheese without a word. The kitchen was my refuge, though even here the echoes of admiration for Marcus reached me. Each laugh, each glass clink, felt like another reminder that in this family, success had a script, and I'd never learned my lines. It had started years ago. I was 14 the Christmas I asked for a computer instead of clothes. Mom, smiling that hostess smile she wore like armor, told the relatives, "She's going through a phase. All this computer nonsense will pass once she discovers boys in makeup." They chuckled, reassured by her certainty. 15 years later, that phase had evolved into something none of them could categorize. Marcus was still the family's golden badge. Varsity football star, Harvard MBA, Goldman Sachs executive, married to the picture-perfect Jennifer from Connecticut. Meanwhile, I was the one who required explanations, the one whose story never translated well at dinner parties. I carried the trays out to the living room, careful to place them on the coffee table without disrupting Marcus's spotlight. Aunt Patricia asked sharp, practice questions about deal structures and regulatory approvals, her voice full of admiration. Marcus explained with crisp confidence, weaving jargon and charm until the entire room seemed hypnotized. Then came the inevitable shift, a lull in conversation, followed by Patricia's head tilt. "And what about Vesper?" The pause before Dad answered was small but obvious to me. I had grown up measuring those pauses like other children measured growth charts. "She's still working with computers," he said at last, the phrase smooth from repetition. "Doing some kind of consulting. Very good at it." "That sort of thing," he added, his diplomatic way of acknowledging me without having to explain what I actually did. I sat down on the arm of a chair, quietly chewing a cracker. "Is she seeing anyone?" Patricia continued, eyes gleaming with polite concern. "She's very focused on her work right now," Mom said quickly, tone even. Translation: still single, probably always will be. Jennifer chimed in, as if rescuing the moment. "Marcus and I are taking our daughter skiing in the Alps next month. The resort has its own helicopter to reach the best slopes." She glanced around, satisfied by the widening eyes. Marcus's bonus was extraordinary this year. I listened from the corner chair that had become my unofficial station at gatherings. The corner was safe, invisible, like a cloak. From there, I could observe every gesture, every sidelong glance, without being expected to participate. The pattern was familiar: Marcus in the center, me at the edges. He was the narrative, I was the footnote. "Vesper, tell everyone about your computer work," Mom said suddenly, her voice warm but calculated. She wanted to include me, to prove the family wasn't neglecting its other child. I gave my well-practiced answer. Mostly technical stuff. Database management, system optimization, quantum processing applications. Pretty boring, unless you're into that kind of thing. The silence that followed was short but sharp. Then Marcus chuckled, smooth as glass. "Vesper's always been more comfortable with machines than people. Some people just have different strengths, you know." Heads nodded. Agreement hummed around the room like static. My interest was harmless, like gardening or stamp collecting. Acceptable hobbies, but nothing you'd build a toast around. The words brushed against me like sandpaper, not deep enough to wound, but relentless in their friction. I smiled faintly, pretending not to feel the sting. Later, as gifts were exchanged, the differences crystallized. Marcus and Jennifer opened boxes containing cashmere scarves from Italy, limited edition wines, jewelry that glittered under the tree lights. I received books on emerging technologies, software licenses, tools for my lab. Practical, useful, unglamorous. Dad examined the textbook I'd given him on quantum computing. He laughed lightly. This looks very advanced. I'm sure it's fascinating to people who understand it. The room hummed with conversation again. Sarah describing her promotion, Uncle Robert bragging about new contracts, Patricia detailing a celebrity client's estate renovation. It was a current I'd learned to float along silently, unnoticed unless prodded. Any big plans for next year, Vesper? Cousin Sarah asked, sipping her wine. Her eyes glinted with polite expectation. I opened my mouth, but Marcus's phone buzzed, saving me from answering. He excused himself, murmuring something about a board presentation. The room leaned in again, eager for more from him. My words, whatever they would have been, dissolved before they could form. By the time Marcus returned, looking pleased with himself, I had retreated deeper into my corner. The conversation swept on, leaving me stranded on the shore. Not everyone needs to achieve extraordinary things to have a meaningful life, Mom said kindly, as if offering me permission to stop trying. Her words were tender, but underneath them lay resignation. I nodded, because what else could I do? The night stretched on. Every laugh, every toast seemed to emphasize the divide. Marcus, celebrated for achievements everyone understood, and me, dismissed for a pursuit no one could. They thought my life was a collection of strange wires and glowing screens, a basement hobby with no future. What they didn't know, what I hadn't yet decided if I wanted them to know, was that outside this house, outside this room, something else was happening. Notifications blinked silently on my phone in my pocket. I had muted them hours ago, but I could feel the vibration still, pulsing against my leg like a secret heartbeat. And part of me wondered if tonight, of all nights, the truth would find its way through the walls of this house. The basement had been meant as a temporary workspace when I came home from MIT. That was 8 years ago. Since then, it had transformed into something unrecognizable. Server racks humming like mechanical lungs, coils of fiber optic cables snaking across the floor, whiteboards layered with formulas and sketches. Most people would call it clutter. To me, it was a cathedral. I had built the space in increments. First came the salvaged parts, discarded circuit boards, broken processors I reassembled, like puzzles. Then came the prototypes, clumsy, temperamental, but alive with possibility. Eventually, the work evolved into something bigger than me. Breakthrough applications in quantum processing, models that bent rules of speed and scale, algorithms designed not just to calculate, but to predict, to adapt, to learn. No one in my family knew what any of it meant. That was fine. It wasn't for them. Yet every time I descended the basement steps, I remembered the night Dad had asked me to keep those beeping things out of sight when guests came over. He hadn't said it unkindly. He'd been embarrassed. Not by me exactly, but by what I represented. A daughter who didn't fit into the frame he wanted to hang on the wall. So the basement became both my sanctuary and my exile. Upstairs, gifts circulated like currency. Marcus and Jennifer received jewelry from European designers, bottles of wine aged longer than my career. I gave out books, licenses, and small devices, things I thought might be useful, even if they were barely understood. Practical, very practical, Uncle Robert said, patting my shoulder with the benevolence of a man who had never seen practicality as glamorous. When the living room conversation shifted toward New Year plans, I excused myself to the kitchen to gather dessert plates. Marcus followed. "You know, Vess," he began, voice pitched low so only I could hear. "It's not too late to consider a more traditional path. I could probably get you into Goldman, maybe the technology support division. It's sophisticated work, good benefits." He spoke like he was offering me a lifeline, not realizing that what he saw as salvation felt like suffocation. I stacked plates methodically, my hands steady though my chest tightened. "Thanks, Marcus, I'll think about it." "You'd be perfect," he pressed on. "Advanced technical skills, steady environment. Leave the business side to people trained for it." I let him finish. I even smiled faintly. He meant well. He always meant well. But his vision for me was a cage built from kindness. When he left, I leaned against the counter, staring at the reflection of the tree lights in the kitchen window. He couldn't imagine that I had already built something far beyond tech support. He couldn't imagine that the hum beneath my feet in the basement was more powerful than the polished boardrooms he worshipped. And maybe I preferred it that way. I carried the plates back to the dining room. Conversation resumed as if nothing had passed between us. Jennifer leaned forward, eager to discuss their daughter's latest preschool assessment. 99th percentile, she said proudly. The headmaster at Riverside Prep personally called us. You can't buy that kind of promise. Aunt Patricia's eyes sparkled. That child will go far, just like her father. I glanced at Marcus, basking in the glow, and wondered if he noticed how naturally everyone assumed his daughter's brilliance was inherited solely from him. Mom, perhaps sensing my silence, tried again. Vesper's been very dedicated to her work, she said, repeating the diplomatic phrase. She's always been independent, sometimes too independent. The words fell like soft weights. Love disguised as concern. Concern disguised as dismissal. The night rolled on. I smiled when expected, nodded when appropriate, but beneath the surface, something was stirring. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. The vibrations came in bursts now, urgent. During a lull, I excused myself to the hallway. Pulling the phone out, I saw a cascade of muted notifications, emails from lawyers, texts from colleagues, pings from news outlets. I didn't open them, not yet. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my pocket, returned to the living room, and sat quietly in my corner chair. Marcus launched into a detailed explanation of his trajectory toward managing director. The family leaned in, enthralled. I watched them from the periphery, detached, as though observing a play I'd already memorized. What none of them knew, what I was still deciding whether to reveal, was that my work had already leapt far beyond the basement. Quantum dynamics wasn't just a collection of prototypes anymore. It was a company, a living, breathing enterprise with patents, clients, and a board of directors. It had been operating in silence, deliberately invisible, until the moment it went public. Last month, that invisibility ended. I thought about the IPO filings, the late-night calls with investors, the surge of numbers across the screen when trading began. I remembered the applause from people I'd never met, investors who believed in something my family couldn't even name. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Upstairs, they were still asking if I was seeing anyone, still debating whether my work would ever lead anywhere. Downstairs, in the humming dark, a billion-dollar empire thrived. I kept silent, letting the room's current pull me back into its rhythm. Marcus laughed at one of his own jokes. Jennifer described a Swiss resort's helicopter. Patricia whispered about opportunities I was missing. And through it all, the phone buzzed again. Something told me the truth would not stay hidden much longer. The wine had settled into everyone's bloodstream, loosening tongues and sharpening edges. The living room felt warmer, too warm. The fire in the hearth crackling with unnecessary intensity. Conversations layered over one another, laughter tumbling in waves, until the current shifted. Cousin Sarah, glass in hand, stood near the center of the room. She had been laid off a month ago, though no one spoke of it directly. Still, the frustration hummed beneath her smile, sparking in the sharpness of her tone. "You know," she began, voice pitched higher than necessary, "I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking." The chatter died, heads turned, the quiet came fast, like a curtain dropping mid-performance. Sarah looked at me. "Vesper, you're becoming an embarrassment to this family." The words sliced through the room. "You're almost 30, she continued, gaining steam. "You're still single, still playing with computers like a teenager. And you refuse to accept help from people who've actually succeeded in the real world." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, pulsing with the unspoken agreement of people who wouldn't have chosen such blunt words but recognized their truth in them. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, then gave a small nod, the kind of gesture that said, "Finally, someone said it for me." Mom fussed with a plate on the coffee table, avoiding my eyes. Dad stared at his hands, thumbs circling the edge of his wedding ring. I kept my voice steady. "I understand." It wasn't surrender exactly. It was survival, the same response I'd used for years to absorb blows without giving them satisfaction. My calm tone settled something in the room. Sarah nodded. Marcus exhaled. The others relaxed as though the dangerous conversation had been handled with civility. Then Dad's phone rang. The sound startled him so much he nearly dropped it. A distinctive tone, one he reserved for professional calls he considered important. He glanced at the screen, eyebrows lifting. "It's Richard Thompson," he said, voice laced with pride and hesitation, "from the Times." He answered on speaker, too flustered to switch it off. "Richard, sorry, it's Christmas evening." "Dave, forgive me," came the booming voice of the journalist, carrying easily into the living room. "I wouldn't intrude if it weren't urgent, but I need to confirm something for a piece I'm working on." Every eye in the room shifted toward Dad, then toward me. "Is your daughter really the Vesper Tally Forbes, just named as America's youngest billionaire?" The sentence landed like a hammer on glass. Time fractured. The only sound was the snap of the firewood. Even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to stop its tick. Dad blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" His voice cracked on the second word. "Vesper Talley, 29 years old," Richard pressed, excitement flooding his tone. "Founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics. Forbes released the list an hour ago. She's number one. Net worth estimated at $3.8 billion. Can you get me an exclusive?" The room was stone. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, watching the shift ripple across familiar faces. Marcus's jaw slackened, his confident smirk crumbling. Jennifer's lips parted in disbelief, the practiced ease of her social grin faltering. Aunt Patricia went pale, her wine glass trembling. Sarah's flush deepened, but this time it wasn't alcohol, it was humiliation. Richard kept speaking, oblivious to the seismic collapse his words had triggered. Quantum dynamics has revolutionized quantum computing for financial modeling and predictive analytics. The IPO last month broke every record. Forbes says she built it from a basement lab. Incredible story. America's most influential young entrepreneur, they're calling her. Dad's hand shook around the phone. His face shifted between pride and terror, disbelief and dawning recognition. The phrase basement lab seemed to echo through the house, crawling up from the floorboards like proof they'd all chosen not to see. "Dave?" Richard prompted. "Are you still there?" Dad cleared his throat, glancing around the room, then at me. His voice was barely audible. She's right here." Every gaze swung toward me. The girl who had been politely tolerated, gently pitied, dismissed as stubborn and impractical, suddenly reframed in an instant. The air felt heavy, too heavy, as though the walls themselves couldn't hold the contradiction. I unfolded my hands slowly, resting them on my knees. "Quantum dynamics has been my primary focus for 8 years," I said quietly. The statement was simple, but the silence it created was absolute. Marcus's phone buzzed violently on the side table. He grabbed it, scanning notifications, his face cycling through disbelief as industry contacts sent him the very news article he'd ignored all evening. His fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled, trying to reconcile the sister he'd offered an entry-level support job with the woman on Forbes' billionaire list. Sarah looked like she wanted to vanish. Her earlier bravado wilted into something small, her voice gone. Jennifer blinked rapidly, as if recalibrating her posture for a new social hierarchy. Patricia whispered, almost to herself, "All those years." Richard's voice still carried through the speaker, enthusiastic. "This is front-page material. Forbes calls it the most disruptive IPO in a decade. Vesper's technology is projected to change entire industries. Dave, can you confirm details? I'd love to set up an interview." Dad couldn't respond. He was still staring at me, the phone shaking in his hand. I finally stood. The movement drew every eye. My legs felt steady, though inside my chest, my heart pounded with a mix of triumph, sorrow, and something darker. The irony was staggering. I had hidden my empire in plain sight, and they had never once thought to look closer. And now, in the most carefully curated gathering of the year, their narrative had shattered. No one moved. The room felt frozen, yet alive with a static charge, like the air just before a storm splits open. Marcus's phone vibrated again, buzzing against the table. He snatched it up, his eyes darting back and forth as messages flooded his screen. "It's all over my group chats," he muttered, disbelief leaking into his voice. "Colleagues are sending me links. They're saying—" He cut himself off, staring at me as though I were a stranger. Jennifer's hand went to her necklace, fingers twisting the delicate chain. She looked from Marcus to me, her expression tilting between calculation and alarm. She had married into a hierarchy she thought she understood. Tonight, the ground shifted. Aunt Patricia broke the silence with a brittle laugh. "This has to be some mistake." But her phone chimed, the Forbes article lighting up her screen. The headline glared back. "America's youngest billionaire, the woman who changed quantum forever." Her lips pressed thin. Uncle Robert leaned forward. "Quantum dynamics," he repeated, testing the words as if they tasted bitter. "That's yours?" "Yes," I said simply. The floodgates opened. "What does it do exactly? Why didn't you tell anyone? 3.8 billion from computers?" I stood near the corner chair, steadying myself as the questions hurled across the room. Each voice carried a different shade: astonishment, envy, pride, fear. It's complicated, I said, trying to keep my tone even. We've been developing applications in quantum computing, processing power that can transform industries like finance, medicine, logistics. 8 years of research, partnerships, patents. We went public last month. Patricia blinked hard. 8 years? You've been, what, running a company from the basement? I almost smiled. From the basement and then far beyond it. Dad still hadn't sat down. He paced in a small circle, his free hand raking through his hair. All this time, he muttered. All this time, I thought... He stopped himself, but the words hung in the air. I thought you were wasting your life. Mom whispered, barely audible. Is it true? Is it really true? Her eyes were wide, trembling with the fragile hope of someone afraid to believe. It's true, I said. Sarah hadn't spoken. She sat stiffly on the couch, wineglass abandoned, her face pale. Her earlier accusation, you're an embarrassment, seemed to echo in the air around her, exposed now as cruel and desperately wrong. Jennifer regained her composure first. Well, she said, her voice sharp, this changes everything, doesn't it? The words were meant to sound gracious, but I caught the edge. The dawning realization that every social story she had told about the family had just been rewritten, and she wasn't sure yet whether she still controlled the narrative. Dad finally remembered Richard was still on the line. Richard, we'll have to talk later. It's a lot right now. Richard, oblivious to the chaos, barreled on. This is monumental, Dave, an empire built under your roof. I'll be in touch tomorrow. My editor wants front page. Dad ended the call, staring at the phone as if it had betrayed him. The room brimmed with attention I had never witnessed in this house. It wasn't the gentle superiority of Marcus's successes or the veiled concern about my choices. It was something raw, the collapse of certainty. Marcus finally spoke, voice low. You should have told us. I looked at him. Would you have listened? His jaw tightened. No answer came. Patricia leaned forward, her tone suddenly honeyed. Vesper, darling, this is extraordinary. Truly. But we could have helped, connected you to people. Why hide it? Because for years, they hadn't wanted to see. Because invisibility had been safer. Because to reveal myself before now would have meant watching them try to own it, explain it, fold it into their story. I needed space, I said carefully, and sometimes invisibility is protection. Uncle Robert snorted. Protection from what? We're family. The word rang hollow, even to him. I caught Marcus staring at the Forbes article on his phone. His lips moved slightly as he read, whispering phrases. Market capitalization, predictive models, disruptor. He looked shaken, almost betrayed. Who told Forbes? Jennifer asked suddenly, sharp as glass. I froze. The article had details, small, intimate things, references to years spent in a basement lab, phrasing that matched conversations I'd had only with family. My stomach twisted. I don't know, I said, though the suspicion burned hot. Aunt Patricia shifted uncomfortably, tucking her phone into her purse. Dad sat heavily in his chair, his face pale. All this time, he repeated, shaking his head, and I dismissed it, dismissed you. His voice cracked. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Mom reached out, placing her hand on mine. I thought you were lost. I didn't see you were building something real. Her eyes shone with tears, not just of pride, but of regret. The relatives had fallen quiet again. Only Marcus's phone buzzed, vibrating against the coffee table. Each notification, another nail in the coffin of the old family narrative. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one sitting small in the corner. I was the center, though not by choice. Their eyes clung to me, filled with hunger, confusion, and something that looked dangerously like desperation. And somewhere beneath all of it, in the quiet spaces of my mind, another thought coiled tight. This story hadn't leaked by accident. The living room thinned as the weight of the revelation settled. Some relatives excused themselves for fresh air, though no one lit a cigarette outside. Others huddled in corners, whispering furiously, their voices pitched low, but not low enough to hide the shock. I slipped into the hallway, needing space. Dad followed. His footsteps were heavy, slower than usual, as though he carried stones in his pockets. Vess, he said softly. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red. I need to tell you something. We stopped near the grandfather clock, its pendulum slicing the silence. Years ago, he began, you had an email from an investor. I saw it on the family computer. You must have forgotten to log out. He rubbed his hands together, knuckles whitening. I thought it was a scam, or worse, a setup to humiliate you if it fell apart. So I rerouted it. I told myself I was protecting you. I stared. You deleted it? I forwarded it to myself, and then I never gave it to you. His voice cracked. I thought if you failed, it would destroy you. I didn't realize you were already building something real. I was afraid, Vess. Afraid you'd crash and everyone would laugh. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The confession pressed into me like a bruise. I wanted to shout, but the anger collided with an ache. He had acted out of love, twisted love. He had stolen opportunity to keep me safe. I let the silence stretch until the pendulum felt louder than his breathing. Finally, I said, "You didn't protect me. You just made me invisible." He flinched. Mom appeared from the dining room, her hands trembling as she smoothed her apron, though dinner had ended hours ago. "Vesper," she whispered, "I need you to know something, too." We moved into the pantry, away from the listening ears. She closed the door gently. "I've downplayed you for years," she admitted, tears already sliding down her cheeks. "Not because I didn't believe in you, but because, whenever I praised you, it caused friction. Donors, clients, even friends, they didn't understand what you were doing. They respected Marcus. They pitied you. I thought I was keeping peace. I thought I was sparing you from their judgment." Her voice cracked. "But in doing that, I joined them. I made you smaller. I'm sorry." I felt something twist inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. She had been balancing appearances like spinning plates, and I had been one she quietly set aside so the others wouldn't shatter. "I wanted you to be proud of me," I whispered. She sobbed, covering her face. "I was. I just didn't know how to show it without losing them." We stood in silence, the smell of spices and dish soap surrounding us. When I left the pantry, Marcus was waiting in the study, door ajar. He gestured me inside. The room smelled of leather and old books. He leaned against the desk, posture stiff. His phone lay beside him, still buzzing intermittently. "You blindsided us," he said, voice controlled but sharp. 8 years, and you never once mentioned you were building a billion-dollar company?" "You wouldn't have heard me," I replied. He let out a short laugh, humorless. "You think so little of me?" "No," I said quietly. "I think you only hear what fits your script." And I didn't fit. For the first time in years, Marcus looked unsettled. His confidence cracked at the edges. He folded his arms. "Look, I'm impressed. Genuinely. But this could be bigger if we aligned. Imagine what I could do for you. Strategic partnerships, introductions. You need people like me now, more than ever." There it was, the offer dressed as generosity but threaded with self-preservation. "I don't need saving, Marcus." He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "Then tell me why Forbes knew about the basement." That phrasing, it sounded like something I said once, when we were talking about your projects years ago. I held his gaze. "Did you leak it?" He recoiled. "No, I wouldn't." His tone carried offense, but underneath it, I detected something else. Fear. If I wanted attention, I'd have claimed I mentored you. I didn't. Before I could press further, Sarah slipped in, her expression taut. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in an hour. "Someone contacted me last week," she blurted. "Asked for details about you. An anonymous account. Wanted anecdotes, family color. I didn't answer, but she trailed off, guilt staining her face. The handle, it was linked to one of Aunt Patricia's clients, a hedge fund family, the same ones Marcus worked with on a deal last year." The pieces clicked uneasily. Patricia's polished concern, the client overlap, the perfectly timed article. My stomach knotted. "Why would Patricia's client want your opinion?" I asked. Sarah shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, but it felt rehearsed." Marcus bristled. "Don't drag me into this. I had nothing to do with it." I scanned their faces, the guilt in Sarah's, the indignation in Marcus's, and realized the truth might not be neat. This wasn't just about family. This was about power, and how easily family could become a pathway for outsiders to pry. Later, when the study emptied, I sat alone and pulled out my phone. Quietly, I checked the server logs. My company's security team had flagged unusual traffic on our filings the night before. The IP block belonged to a PR vendor contracted by a major bank. The same bank Marcus had been bragging about earlier. I locked the screen, pulse quickening. Whether coincidence or not, the circle was closing. And for the first time that night, I wondered if the storm breaking in this house wasn't only about me, it was about what someone wanted from me. By midnight, the house had grown quieter, but not calmer. The relatives who had left early had done so with stiff smiles, clutching coats like shields. Those who remained lingered in the living room, casting furtive glances at me as though trying to decide whether I was still the same Vesper or someone entirely new. I stood near the fireplace, feeling the weight of every gaze, enough shadows, enough whispers. "I need to say something," I began. My voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the room. Conversation stilled. Marcus looked up from his phone, Jennifer froze mid-sip of wine, and Dad lowered his hands from his face. "You've all spent years deciding what I am. The quiet one, the stubborn one, the disappointment, the embarrassment." I paused, letting the words land. "But tonight you found out the truth. I was never lost. I was building." No one interrupted. The fire snapped sharply, punctuating the silence. "I don't need applause," I continued. "I don't need validation. What I need is respect. Going forward, family access isn't a privilege granted by last names. It's earned by trust. No one speaks for me, no one leaks on me, and no one rewrites my story to fit their comfort." Jennifer set her glass down with a clink. Aunt Patricia's lips tightened, but she said nothing. "I'm not shutting this door," I added softer. "I believe in family. That's why I've created something for ours, a philanthropic fund to support tech education for kids in this family and beyond. For the ones who get overlooked, the way I was. But it won't be run through cocktail parties or country clubs. It will be independent, transparent." The words hung there, daring anyone to object. Dad's chin trembled. "Vesper, I don't deserve to ask, but can I fix this, somehow?" I met his eyes, worn and uncertain. "I don't want you to fix me. I want you to be honest with me. That's all I've ever needed." His shoulders slumped, but his eyes filled with something fragile, relief. Marcus spoke next, his tone subdued, stripped of its usual polish. "If there's room, I'd like to help. Not for money, not for credit, just to learn, to be part of something real." The room seemed to inhale at once, waiting for my response. I studied him, the brother who had offered me a support role hours ago, who had carried both admiration and resentment like twin weights. He looked smaller now, humbled, though not destroyed. "I can offer you a trial," I said slowly. "Advisory capacity only. Clear boundaries. If you respect them, maybe more. If you don't, it ends." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. Jennifer shot him a glance, lips tightening, but stayed silent. Mom whispered, "What about Richard's interview?" The question tugged at me. The journalist still expected an exclusive, and the family knew it. "I could give it to Dad to arrange," I mused aloud. "That would give him back dignity. Or I could do it myself, clean and simple." I let the thought linger, then added, "But I'll choose a third way, a joint interview. I'll speak for myself. Dad can share one true story, from his heart. No polish, no exaggeration, just honesty." Dad's eyes widened, then softened. His voice cracked as he said, "Thank you." The tension in the room shifted, still heavy, but looser, as though the air had found a vent. Some relatives leaned back, others exhaled. For the first time all evening, I felt a fragile bridge stretching between us, unsteady but real. When the coats came out and the goodbyes were exchanged, the hugs felt tentative. Not the shallow pecks of earlier years, not yet the fierce embraces of reconciliation, but something in between, an acknowledgement that the ground had shifted and no one quite knew how to walk on it. Marcus lingered at the door, his hand brushing my shoulder. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I want to earn this." I nodded once, then start by listening. He swallowed, then left with Jennifer and their daughter. At last, the house emptied. The silence afterward was immense, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the dying crackle of the fire. I slipped my phone from my pocket. One new message blinked on the screen from an unknown number. It wasn't Marcus. Check Patricia's client list. I stared at it, pulse spiking. The fire popped behind me, scattering sparks. My eyes flicked to the mantel, to the gleaming trophies that had once been symbols of my invisibility. They gleamed now like relics of a story that no longer held power. I looked back at the message. Whoever had sent it knew more than they should. The leak wasn't over. This night wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And as the house settled into uneasy silence, I realized I had a choice. Let the family's fractures heal naturally, or dig deeper to uncover who had turned my own bloodline into a conduit for betrayal. For the first time all evening, a slow smile crept across my face. The storm wasn't finished. It had only just begun.